Stretching across more than 800,000 square kilometers, Namibia boasts some of the world's most pristine landscapes, hosting an abundance of precious plant and wildlife species. Many visit from far and wide to experience the breathtaking scenery and diverse group of people rich with history and culture. Amongst its many natural treasures is the Kavango River flowing through the Kavango region, located in the northeastern corner of Namibia. The Kavango River plays an integral role in the survival of the Kavango people. With an abundance of freshwater fish, the river serves as an ideal source of sustenance for locals, as well as a point of interest for avid anglers visiting the surrounding tourist destinations. Agriculture also forms part of its many purposes. The fertile soil along the river allows for the cultivation of sorghum, millet, and maize. The Kavango is undoubtedly the hub of the region's economic activity, a reliable water source and breadbasket. But with the current oil and gas explorations in the Kavango, it's not certain that Namibia's natural beauty and abundant resources will remain untainted. In early 2020, Reconnaissance Energy Africa, also referred to as Recon Africa, kicked off site preparations at Kawe and Mambi villages in the Kavango East region. According to Recon Africa, the undertaking entails drilling 3 conventional stratigraphic wells and conducting a low-impact 2D seismic program to determine if there's a working petroleum system in the Kavango Basin. However, it's alleged that Recon Africa will be fracking.
Okay, so fracking is, relatively speaking, the latest extraction technology in the oil and gas industry. Previously, what we would call conventional oil and gas wells, we would drill into a very porous, permeable reservoir rock. So we could just put a straw into that rock and the deep pressures can push the fluids to the wellbore and to the surface. And you don't need to stimulate the reservoir to create man-made porosity and permeability to get that oil and gas out. Now, oil and gas is generated in an organic rich rock that as you bury it, the deep pressures and temperatures will cook the organic material, and this is what bubbles off the oil and gas, one oil droplet, one gas molecule at a time. Now, oil and gas is buoyant in the subsurface, so it sort of through time makes its way through the subsurface and then hopefully finds one of those conventional traps. This frac technology allowed us to target these organic rich source rocks that tend to be very tight. So if we drill a traditional well into it, none of the oil and gas will flow to the wellbore. So instead, we have to drill these long horizontals to get a lot of, in a sense, surface area through that organic rich source rock. And then we do these multiple breakings of the rock, the fracking of the rock that creates man-made permeability. So now that oil and gas can flow to the wellbore. And essentially that's what fracking is.
It is standard practice to inform the locals of any plans to operate on their land before any work commences. In this case, however, it seems it was not a priority.
Recon Africa started operating in the area without the legally documents or the blessing from the traditional authority. In January now, because the exploration started in January at Kawe village. Secondly, Recon Africa operated without a written consent from the Conservancy and Community Forest. And these are one of the biggest requirements which are stipulated or prescribed in the Environmental Management Act, which state that if you are working or doing the activities or mining activities in the Conservancy or Community Forest, you have to obtain a written permission from the chairpersons of the Conservancy, the landowners, from the traditional authorities, and from the local government.
When Recon Africa was getting the license to drill, they had to have consultations with the community, the different communities. So the communities that we work with informed us that they were not consulted, and the consultations were not free, prior, and informed. That means that the consultations only talked about the benefits of what well and gas exploration will mean for the community. It never really touched on the potential impacts it will have. And then it didn't consider the social economic status of certain indigenous people that live there, that looked at if there is employment, who will be employed? Because in what type of employment will it be? How much will someone be paid? Will people just have low earning jobs? Because we know that these mining jobs are very high skilled jobs. Will women be employed? Will that again create gender inequality in the communities? What does it mean for their health? What does it mean for their land, for their culture? If trees are getting cut down, if animals, potentially the migration of animals also gets stopped, because this is closely linked to their cultural heritage and their livelihoods. What does it mean if areas get fenced off? And is this again a repetition of history when some people were chased out of areas and put into corridors or pushed out of their land? While we are saying that they were not consulted or they didn't give consent, is more like you were told this is going to happen, but did the whole community engage in it? Because everybody has the right to speak on what's going to happen. So not everybody was part of the consultation, but only headmen or people in leadership positions come together and speak.
We are a developing nation and we already have our own social problems, but because these activities are banned in their countries in the global north, they come to global south countries and take advantage of weak and corruptible governments and basically go ahead with these projects, irregardless of what civil society organizations and also people on the ground say, especially when they try to voice their concern.
To locate the gas and oil underground, Recon Africa carries out what are called seismic surveys, referred to as thumping by locals. This entails deploying an array of energy sources and sensors or receivers in the area of interest. The source of seismic waves is either an explosive or a mechanical source. This thumping by heavy machinery disturbs the surrounding environment in many ways.
On the environmental management plan that they submitted to Ministry of Environment, they said they will only follow the existing road when they will do the survey. But when they carried out the survey practical, they did not follow what was in the environmental management plan that they submitted. They cross-cutted lines, doing or thumping in the crop field, thumping in the household yard, which even caused for 3 incidents that took place. One incident was at Ngaute village where the house cracked due to the thumping vibration. The second house was at Taratara, and the third house was at Ngogo. Those incidents happened as a result of thumping during their seismic survey, and also they were opening new roads which was not part of the management plan which they submitted.
They managed to get a environmental clearance certificate to carry out seismic surveys, that is, sending down waves down the ground to see exactly where the oil is located. And so they have this tractor with a huge metal thing that they thump in the ground, and that sends waves down the ground. And the thumping has been, it's actually really heavy. They make it sound like it's harmless, but it's really impactful and strong, that it has caused people's houses to be destroyed, to fall down, and people are really angry. And there was this incident where the local communities had taken Recon Africa's vehicle by force, and they wanted payment for the houses that were destroyed during the seismic that they are carrying out. And yes, it's destroying people's houses, and I don't know why this process is still continuing. That it should have been stopped. And actually what happens as well, that area where Recon Africa is exploring is a migratory area for savanna elephants. And elephants use seismic waves as well to communicate with one another, where the food is, where the danger is, that kind of thing. So it's actually what Recon Africa is doing is disturbing these animals' communication channels so that they wouldn't be able to communicate with one another as they do. And then when that happens, these animals will start, getting confused about where to go, and that's where they come, when they come closer to people's homesteads, and then, the nature, wildlife, and human conflict starts. And yeah, that's definitely a chaotic, situation we are talking about. And there has been reports of elephants now coming closer to people's homesteads now when Recon Africa started exploring for oil in the Kavango regions.
Fracking is also a thirsty operation using between 5 and 20 million litres per frack well.
And the question is, where does a water deficit country like Namibia get that water from? Well, there's only two sources. It could only either be the Kavango River itself, which we know leads into the Kavango Delta, some 250 kilometers downstream from the area, or the alternative is groundwater resources. And if you draw that type of volume of water out of the ground, you're actually exceeding its recharge rate. So it means that you're actually mining the water, you're reducing it, you're taking it out, not to be replaced in probably millions of years.
And what Recon Africa was bragging to their investors in a YouTube video a while ago was they showed a map of Namibia and they said, yeah, Namibia, there's great roads from Walvis Bay, the harbour, up into the Kavango, and we'll have no problem with the water because there's the Kavango River. That Kavango River was almost empty already this dry season because it didn't rain in Angola. People could walk across the Kavango River from Rundu into Angola. Now there's an oil company saying we will use that water from the Kavango River for thousands of frack wells.
And the number of wells we're usually talking about for the size of the Kavango is around 20,000 plus frack wells. Doesn't take much imagination to see how that would completely transform this pristine environment and subsistence farmland for Namibians.
Over and above straining the nation's water resources, Recon Africa's poor practices risk polluting the river and groundwater.
The main concern that a lot of organizations and experts have is the possibility of contamination of underground water in the Kavango Basin. And water in that region and in Namibia as a whole is an extremely precious resource to us. And so if there were to be any contamination whatsoever, if there were to be any accidents, any oil spills whatsoever, like we see in so many cases with oil and gas drilling projects around the world, we are at the mercy of not only a government that cannot afford the reparations, but the climate crisis, which is going to make any of these effects even much, much, much worse.
So they want to take that clean water, put it into their wells, drill it into the ground. It'll come up toxic. They will repump that toxic wastewater back into the ground. So what we're seeing is, just thousands of square meters of land poisoned.
My biggest fear is the risk to the water resource. And actually, a lot of where the water contamination can happen is in your wastewater injection well. We're injecting water at such high pressures that you can break the rock, and that's usually when you breach into a potable aquifer, and all of that toxic wastewater makes its way into the aquifer. So this is like the long-term threat of fracking from the water standpoint.
Fracking has detrimental health and environmental effects compared to conventional methods. As such, health and safety measures must be taken into consideration to minimize these hazards and risks. Recon Africa in the exploration activities, however, has failed to follow such procedures.
I became aware at a very early stage that they had created these mud drilling ponds or containment dams, which is a normal practice. But the normal practice in the United States and around the world is to line those facilities, because once that drilling mud has been used in the drilling process, it re-emerges onto the surface. That becomes a hazardous waste. It contains a host of different organic compounds, naturally occurring radioactive materials, hypersaline brine. That's all part of the normal drilling process. And so normally that waste product, the liquid slurry, is contained in a pond, which is lined, usually with an HDPE or plastic liner. In the case of Recon Africa, they didn't line either of their ponds. What they did tell us is that they've used this magic muti, a gel type thing that they spray onto the base of the pond, and that seals it. Well, I've tried and have made huge endeavors to try and find out what this product's called, what it consists of, and how it's applied. Recon Africa would never once reply to any of my questions. So I went a bit further, and ultimately a colleague of mine who I work closely with phoned the Texas Rail Commission, that's the authority in the United States and Texas, who are charged with managing all of fracking and fracking waste and everything associated with fracking. They take control of it and they regulate that process. Well, when my colleague phoned them, they'd never heard of any gel like this. They laughed, in fact. And that's, there was a little bit of kind of sniggering in the background and said, no, we've never heard of anything like this. It certainly doesn't occur in the United States. And if it were, it would have to go through rigorous testing to prove that it actually works and does what it claims to work.
The drilling kind of brings along with it sludge and mud, drill waste fluids that it brings up with it. And within the waste drill fluids, there are chemical compounds. There could be also naturally occurring uranium coming up that they dig out as they are drilling the holes. And this obviously is very unhealthy to humans and also to animals and to the entire environment, I would say. So what the problem is with Recon Africa's drilling is the waste drill fluid. They are not disposing it according to environmental management because they haven't lined the pits in which they dispose these drill fluids. They're supposed to line it so that the waste drill fluids doesn't seep down the ground, and especially that area where they are drilling, exploring for oil, that's a sandy area, so it's very porous and it's very easy for that waste, contaminated with naturally occurring, for example, uranium, to seep down the ground and contaminate the groundwater, especially these people in that area. The infrastructure is not well developed. They depend on this water for survival. And when that water is contaminated, God knows where they're going to get their water from. But what the issue is that 1 kilometer away from where Recon Africa is drilling, there's a river called the Matako River. And there's also a risk that this contamination will lead to the river, the Matako River, which then goes to the Okavango River. And of course, as we know, it ends up at the Okavango Delta. So there's a risk that this whole area, the Okavango Delta and the Okavango region, will be poisoned through the mismanagement of Recon Africa, the drill fluids that they dig up.
So the Kavango area is one of the most important watersheds in Namibia, and it is upriver of the Okavango River and then the Okavango Inland Delta in Botswana. So any pollution or water contamination that happens in the Kavango not only threatens the local water supply for the subsistence farmers that live there, but then it threatens the water in the Okavango River and then in the Delta. And because the Okavango Delta is an inland delta, any pollution that makes its way into the delta will stay there. It's not like a delta that spews its water into the ocean and then it spreads out. So the water resource is the biggest threat. And the way that Recon Africa has behaved, well documented that they didn't line their pits, and then when confronted, they doubled down and said, oh, no, our wastewater is completely safe, and in fact, it can be used as a fertilizer on the subsistence farmland, which is just a free way for them to dump their toxic wastewater on the local subsistence farmland, is just a huge red flag that they are not operating at international best standards, and that we can't trust their operations going forward, and they could be damaging the water resources even with the first, couple of wells they've drilled.
The effects of the project surpass the environment. There are also social and health implications.
And the other thing that we've done a lot of research on is the health impacts, particularly on women and children. There's a consortium of physicians in the US that have been collecting every study on health impacts in Canada, in the US, worldwide, the cancers, the spontaneous abortions, the congenital deformities of babies, the long-term impact on the reproductive health of women. It's all there. There's a huge compendium that our politicians could just Google and read. And it's written in a way that we can all understand. It has all the footnotes with all the medical research. Often the media is more on the ball and finds out about health issues. But that is also huge. And that is something that is not addressed here at all. So what we are calling for as Women's Leadership Centre, but also as the civil society movement in Namibia, is an independent public inquiry into all these impacts of any kind of oil and gas production around the world. And let's learn from history. Let's learn from what is happening right now.
Looking at the region is already one of the highest HIV prevalence rate in the country with teenage pregnancy. So how will that further impact the livelihoods of girls and women that's there? Because we know when it comes to any oil and mining or drilling or anything like that, there is an influx of a lot of men that set up men camps. So with the research that we have done, we saw that there's a lot of things that happen.
A common selling point for a project of this nature is that it offers not only employment, but also supports the respective region's economy. In this case, however, experts reveal that the efforts are all in vain and are nothing more than smoke and mirrors.
So, looking at all of the publicly available data, both of what Recon Africa's released and all of the prior exploration work that's been done in northern Namibia, it's pretty clear to me that there is very low likelihood of commercial oil and gas in the Kavango. And if there is, it would have to be fracked to get out of the ground. And on top of that, the primary petroleum system that Recon Africa says that it's discovered, it's very obvious that's actually not even in the Kavango. All of the geologists in Namibia who aren't related to the company or aren't being employed by the company, we're all talking and we all agree there's no commercial oil and gas in the Kavango. Why that's important is the worst type of oil and gas company to have doing work in your backyard is a company who knows there's no oil and gas, and they will cut every shortcut possible to preserve capital to keep the fantasy of a commercial deposit alive for a publicly traded company. And in the case of Recon Africa, their shares are owned by retail investors, not institutions. So this is essentially a play where they're trying to get unsophisticated retail investors to pump up the stock. And I believe the company insiders then can sell off at a high price until the whole house of cards collapses. But this is a big deal because, company who has no future, has no production potential in the area, they will cut every capital expense possible and do things that are, what's said in the industry a lot is if you can see people taking shortcuts on the surface. You know they're taking shortcuts downhole where things get really expensive, and actually that's where a lot of the greatest environmental threats are.
The locals who are aware of the consequences of this project are strongly against it proceeding and have made efforts to raise awareness.
We wrote a petition that we sent, and secondly, we submitted objection letter when they put, or when they applied for the right of leasehold. And thirdly, we are trying to do educational or awareness campaign to the villages so that our people should understand what they will face in future if the exploration or the production of oil and gas is going to materialize. But the problem now, the resources that we are having is not enough. As we are a non-profit organization, we have to run left and right looking for resources so that we can reach all the corner in Kavango East and Kavango West to give to each and every one of the targeted group the awareness so that they can aware the impact of oil and gas industry.
In the beginning of the year, when we saw the article by Rob Parker in the newspaper, Canada Come Get Your People, the Women's Leadership Center decided to join and build a civil society organization to stop the oil and drilling exploration that's happening in the Kavango Delta. So by that, we decided to build a civil society campaign around it to stop all oil and gas drilling and exploration in the region, as well as Namibia as a whole.
There are two groups we are working with in the Kavango East region. One group is in Omega 1 in the Papata National Park. One group is in Buchiku on the Kavango River. And we realized Indigenous women's voices need to be heard in this campaign. And so we decided, let's bring the San Young women to Windhoek, let's bring the Namibian Sand Council to Windhoek. So we train them and they can go back and start informing their communities about what is happening.
Companies from the global north exploiting the resources of Namibia and leaving it arid and damaged does not end with oil and gas explorations. It further stretches into uranium mining.
The relationship between Recon Africa's oil drilling project in the Kavango Basin and that of the Russian company in the Luxemburg Basin, what relates them is the fact that these companies are operating in basins. If you're operating in a basin in a country that is water insecure and water scarce, it means that you don't care about the human rights of the people, their rights to clean water, their rights to well-being and livelihood, right? You don't care about that. And sometimes it can get so murky with all the politics and all the bureaucracies, why they are justifying this. They are weighing economic well-being of the people and their livelihoods, their culture and their day-to-day lives with vegetation and all that. You weigh all these things. But the point is, these companies don't care about that. They're trying to look for greenwashing schemes to make it seem as though what they're doing is not as bad as it sounds. But it is as bad as it sounds, because our heart in Namibia lies with the water. All the cultures and indigenous communities are basically centered around water. So if you have companies that are coming to jeopardize the security of the water in these communities, then it's a human rights issue. It shouldn't even be an environmental issue anymore.
There is a big open pit uranium mining issue in Namibia, and I do think that is significant. There's also an in situ aquifer uranium leach mining of projects that are about to start up. So this is where you have a uranium ore front inside a potable aquifer. And because the uranium's in an ore, it's not dissolved in the water, so it's not a threat as long as it stays in its solid ore state. But there's some new uranium leach mine companies that are trying to start up projects where they pump sulfuric acid into a potable aquifer to dissolve the uranium to then pump it back up to the surface. And then they just keep recycling this sulfuric acid into the aquifer to dissolve the uranium and leach it to get that leach fluid to the surface. The big issue there is that you're dissolving uranium in a potable aquifer, and this aquifer is very connected to the different aquifer rock bodies above and below it. And this aquifer water is not staying put, it's flowing to the south and east. So this is an area in southeast Namibia where this particular in situ uranium leach mining is going on. And it actually not only threatens Namibia's aquifer resource, but Botswana and South Africa's as well, because this water is flowing in those directions into those, underground into those countries. And one of the local Namibian geologists has given several talks to the public about this. And the most recent talk, a couple days after he gave the talk, the Namibian Water and Agricultural Ministry demanded that the company return their permits and to shut down operations. So this has become, this particular uranium leach mining issue in potable aquifers, most arid country in southern sub-Saharan Africa. This is like a big deal. Anytime you risk water resource, this is a massive deal for Namibia. So I think public presentations by geologists to have actually moved the needle on that and got the government to move and revoke permits from this company.
So the Kavango region and really the northern strip of Namibia is the only green area in Namibia. It's the only regions that have dependable rainfall. It's our only version of a forest here in a dry and arid country. And so there's a lot of biodiversity, natural biodiversity there. It's actually quoted to be of global importance. The biodiversity in that region going into the Kavango Delta is quoted to be of global importance. Scientists come there to study all this biodiversity. And the communities that live there are still doing a lot of subsistence activities that are dependent on the cycles of nature, natural cycles of nature. So really they are dependent on a healthy ecosystem that is undisturbed in whatever way. We also have our national efforts towards ecotourism in that region, and it's, I think, the one region that is doing quite well in that respect. And so just this project, no tourist would want to come to the Kavango region, into the Kavango basin, and want to see drill sites in the neighbor of the lodge that they are staying at.
Putting profits over people and the environment is going to cost Namibians far more than Recon Africa can make from this endeavor.